A black waitress greeted a deaf visitor in sign language, and the billionaire CEO was left stunned. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's incredible story. It was a night like no other at the exclusive Emerald Bay restaurant, an upscale venue perched atop a high-rise building in the heart of New York City. The city's lights flickered like stars beneath the glass windows, and the chatter of the elite mixed with the soft jazz playing in the background. At a prime table near the window sat a group of businessmen, their voices low but their confidence high. Among them was Carl Montgomery, the billionaire CEO of a leading tech company, a man used to the finest things life had to offer. He was known for his cold demeanor, his sharp suits, and his reputation for dismissing anyone who didn't belong in his world. That night, he sat, one arm draped casually over his chair, his eyes scanning the room with the kind of practiced indifference that came from years of power. He didn't see the waitstaff as people. They were simply part of the decor, there to serve and disappear. Naomi Carter, the waitress assigned to the table, had learned early on to blend into the background. At 24, she was still working her way through college, taking night shifts at the restaurant to make ends meet. Naomi had always been a quiet presence, polite and efficient, her movements practiced but unnoticed by most. However, there was something different about her tonight. Maybe it was the fact that her shift had been longer than usual. Maybe it was the weariness in her bones from working back-to-back shifts. But as she moved between tables, her thoughts kept drifting back to the new customer at table 12, Carl Montgomery, the man who had so much money that the zeros in his bank account were practically a foreign language. And yet, there was something about him that made her stomach churn. She had seen his type before, the type who saw people like her as nothing more than tools, meant to be used and discarded. Naomi was used to being invisible, but tonight, something inside her snapped. As she approached the table, Carl's gaze swept over her like she wasn't even there. He snapped his fingers to get her attention, his voice dripping with condescension. "Hey, sweetheart, bring me a bottle of the best wine," he said, barely looking up from his phone. Naomi didn't flinch. She had heard worse in the past, but this time, something was different. As she turned to walk away, her heart was heavy with the sting of his words. That was when she noticed him. Seated at the same table was a woman, elderly and elegant, with silver hair tied in a neat bun. She had the kind of presence that demanded respect, yet no one seemed to acknowledge her. Her hands moved subtly, forming gestures in the air, a language Naomi instantly recognized. It was American Sign Language. The woman was deaf. Naomi's heart softened. She had grown up in a small town where her mother had taught her sign language, and over the years, she had become fluent. It wasn't something she often revealed, but tonight, she felt a strange sense of connection with the woman who was so clearly being ignored. Without thinking, Naomi approached the table, her heart racing. She knelt down next to the elderly woman, and in fluent sign language, she greeted her with a warm smile. "Good evening. How are you?" The woman's eyes widened in surprise, then softened as she smiled back, her hands moving gracefully in response. Naomi's gesture was simple, but in that moment, it felt like the whole room shifted. For a brief second, time seemed to stop. Carl Montgomery, the billionaire CEO, finally looked up from his phone, his eyes locking onto Naomi with a mixture of disbelief and disdain. He had been so sure of his dominance over the room, so sure that the people around him were beneath him. But now, Naomi had caught his attention in a way he didn't expect. He had never considered that someone like her could have a talent like this, something beyond serving drinks and clearing plates. Naomi stood up slowly, meeting Carl's gaze without a hint of fear. She didn't care what he thought of her. She had already taken control of the moment, and in doing so, she had changed everything. Naomi stood there for a moment, the silence in the room almost deafening. The elderly woman, still looking at her with wide, grateful eyes, gave her a gentle nod. It was a brief exchange, but for Naomi, it meant the world. As she turned to leave, she felt the weight of Carl Montgomery's gaze on her. His eyes were narrowed, filled with something Naomi couldn't quite place. Disbelief? Annoyance? Or was it something more? She could feel the tension building, the atmosphere in the restaurant suddenly thick with judgment. She walked back to the bar, her mind racing. She had always kept her sign language skills hidden, a part of her past that she never revealed to anyone. But tonight was different. Tonight, in that brief moment of connection, she had made her presence known. And that, she realized, was something Carl Montgomery wasn't used to. As Naomi reached for a fresh bottle of wine to deliver to a nearby table, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the room. The patrons at the other tables were whispering to each other, their glances lingering on her, some filled with admiration, others with confusion. But all of them were noticing her now, something she had always tried to avoid. She wasn't sure what Carl Montgomery was thinking, but the way he had stared at her, almost as if trying to understand her, left her unsettled. She had heard the stories about him, how ruthless he was in the boardroom, how he could make or break a company with a single phone call. He wasn't a man who paid attention to people like her. And yet, there she was, standing at the edge of his world, and for the first time, she felt like she might belong somewhere. As Naomi poured the wine into the glass, she caught Carl's gaze again. This time, there was no dismissive sneer, no condescending glance. Instead, there was something new, curiosity. He raised an eyebrow slightly, as if weighing her in his mind. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't even look away. She was done being invisible. She had spent years playing by society's rules, hiding her talents, holding her tongue. But now, in front of Carl Montgomery, she realized something. She had just as much value as he did. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to make that clear. As she finished the pour, Naomi turned to walk away, but Carl spoke. "Hey," he said, his voice surprisingly soft for someone of his stature. "I didn't know you spoke sign language." Naomi paused, her back still to him. For a brief moment, she felt the urge to turn around and give him a piece of her mind. But instead, she took a deep breath and kept her composure. She wasn't about to let him off easy, but she wasn't about to let him off with ignorance, either. "I didn't know you were capable of learning something new," she replied, her voice steady. It was a small jab, but it hit home. Carl's eyes flickered with something. Was it surprise? Disappointment? He opened his mouth to respond, but stopped himself. Naomi could feel the eyes of the other guests on her. She knew this moment was being observed. She had made her stand. The moment wasn't about Carl Montgomery or his wealth. It was about her, Naomi Carter, taking control of her story. She didn't need to beg for respect. She was going to take it. She turned on her heel and walked away, her footsteps steady and sure. As she made her way back to the bar, she heard Carl's voice once more. This time, it was different. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone unexpectedly sincere. Naomi froze for a moment. She hadn't expected that. She turned to face him, raising an eyebrow. Carl's face was unreadable, but there was a hint of vulnerability there that wasn't usually visible. "For what?" she asked, her voice softening just a bit. Carl cleared his throat, glancing around as if unsure of himself. "For not acknowledging you earlier. For assuming you were just another waitress." Naomi studied him carefully. Was this an apology? Or was it just a moment of weakness on his part? Either way, she wasn't about to give him an easy out. "It's all right," she said, her voice cool. "But next time, maybe you'll think twice before making assumptions about people." With that, she turned back to her work, feeling the weight of the moment lift off her shoulders. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, the usual rhythm of the restaurant returning, but something had changed. Naomi wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone who had made an impact, who had made a billionaire CEO stop and think. And that, she realized, was worth more than any tip he could ever leave. As the night went on, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She had stood her ground in front of Carl Montgomery, and for the first time, she felt like she had been seen. The rest of the evening was a blur of movements and orders, but there was a new energy in the air, something that made her walk a little taller, stand a little prouder. She continued her shift as usual, but each time she passed Carl's table, she caught his eye. And each time, there was something different there, a flicker of something. Was it respect? Or just a fleeting acknowledgement of his own mistake? She couldn't quite tell, but she knew this was not the same man who had dismissed her earlier. By the time her shift was nearing its end, Naomi had already made up her mind. She was done playing small. She was done hiding who she was and what she had to offer. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a woman with a voice, with a story, and with the right to be heard. As she cleared the last table of the night, Naomi's phone buzzed in her pocket. She took it out, expecting it to be a text from her mom or one of her friends, but the number on the screen was unfamiliar. It was a New York area code. Hesitating for a moment, Naomi answered. "Hello?" she said, trying to keep the weariness out of her voice. "Miss Carter." The voice on the other end was deep, calm, and confident. "This is Carl Montgomery." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. Carl Montgomery? Why was he calling her? "I wanted to thank you," Carl continued. "For tonight. You caught me off guard." Naomi blinked in surprise. This wasn't what she expected. Was he actually thanking her? "Thank you," she repeated, unsure of where this conversation was going. "Yes," Carl said. "I've been thinking about what happened all night. I've worked with hundreds of people, but you," he paused for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. "You're different. You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for something bigger. And that's something I respect." Naomi didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to hearing those kinds of words, especially not from someone like Carl. "I appreciate that," she finally said, her voice steady. "But I didn't do it for you. I did it for me. For my dignity." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. She could almost hear Carl thinking. "I understand," he said finally. "And I'm sorry. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I think it's time I start making things right." Naomi felt her heart race a little faster. What was he saying? "I'd like to offer you a job," Carl said, his tone sincere. "A real job. Not just as a waitress, but something more. You're clearly capable of more than serving drinks, and I want to see what you can do." Naomi felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. A job? From Carl Montgomery? The billionaire CEO who had barely acknowledged her existence earlier that evening? "What kind of job?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm opening a new division in my company," Carl explained. "It's focused on social responsibility and inclusion. And I think someone with your background, your perspective, could make a real difference. I want you to be part of it." Naomi's mind was spinning. This was more than she had ever expected. She had never imagined she'd be offered a job like this, let alone from a man like Carl Montgomery. But there was something in his voice, something genuine, that made her believe he was serious. "I don't know what to say," she replied, still in shock. "You don't have to say anything right now," Carl said. "I'm going to send over the details, and you can take your time to think about it. But just know that I'm offering this to you because I believe you have something special, and I don't want to waste that." Naomi stood there, the phone pressed to her ear, trying to process what had just happened. In a matter of minutes, everything had changed. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a woman who had taken a stand and, in doing so, had earned the respect of one of the most powerful men in the city. She had proven to herself, and to him, that she was more than just a face in the crowd. She was someone who deserved to be seen. As she hung up the phone, Naomi took a deep breath and looked out over the restaurant. The night had been long, but it had been worth it. She had made a mark, not just on Carl Montgomery, but on herself. And as she walked toward the door, she couldn't help but smile. The world was about to see her in a whole new light. Naomi couldn't believe it. The offer from Carl Montgomery, the billionaire CEO who had dismissed her earlier that night, still felt like a dream. She had spent the rest of her shift in a daze, the weight of his words replaying in her mind. A job, a real job, not just waiting tables, but something that could change everything for her. She had always known she was capable of more, but to have someone like Carl acknowledge her, someone so powerful, it was almost too much to comprehend. As she sat in her tiny apartment later that night, her phone buzzing with a message from Carl's assistant, Naomi took a deep breath. This was her chance, the one she had been waiting for, the one she had been working for, even if she didn't know it. The next morning, Naomi found herself sitting in Carl's office at the top of one of the tallest buildings in the city, the skyline stretching out in every direction. The assistant had guided her in, offering polite smiles but keeping a professional distance. Naomi could feel the difference now. No longer was she a server, an invisible part of the background. Today, she was part of something bigger. She had no idea what this new job would entail, but she was ready to find out. As Carl entered the room, Naomi stood up, her palms slightly sweaty but her posture strong. He extended his hand to her, a firm, confident shake. "Naomi," he said, his voice warm but still carrying the weight of authority. "I'm glad you came. Let's talk about what comes next." Naomi nodded, trying to keep her emotions in check. She wasn't used to being in these kinds of situations, wasn't used to sitting in boardrooms or having important meetings. She had been working in restaurants since she was 15, just trying to make it through, never imagining that something like this could happen. Carl motioned for her to sit, and he took his place behind the massive desk, his chair creaking slightly as he leaned forward. I want to tell you about this new division I'm starting. It's going to be focused on corporate responsibility, diversity, inclusion, and giving back to the community. I've been thinking about this for a while now, but I need someone with a fresh perspective. Someone who's not afraid to challenge the status quo. Naomi listened carefully, absorbing his words, but her mind was still racing. So, you want me to help lead this new project? She asked, her voice steady despite the nerves that were threatening to surface. Carl gave a small smile. Exactly. But it's not just about the work. It's about making a difference. I've been at the top of this industry for years, but I've realized that the real power is in the people. And I think you're someone who understands that better than most. Naomi felt her heart swell with a mix of pride and disbelief. This was the moment she had dreamed about, the moment where her worth wasn't determined by her job title or her past. It was determined by her talent, her drive, and her ability to change the narrative. I want you to head up the team that will work on these initiatives. You'll have complete creative control over the direction we take. But I need someone who's not afraid to push boundaries, who's willing to make the tough calls. Naomi sat up straighter, feeling the weight of the responsibility, but also the excitement. This was her chance to prove to herself, and to the world, that she belonged. I'm ready, she said, her voice full of determination. Carl nodded, his expression serious. Good. I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do. As she left his office later that day, Naomi couldn't help but smile. She had taken a leap of faith, and it had paid off. She wasn't just going to be part of the background anymore. She was going to make a real impact, and it started now. Over the next few weeks, Naomi threw herself into the new role with everything she had. She worked late nights, brainstorming with her team, developing strategies, and building connections within the company. She was no longer the quiet waitress. She was a leader, someone whose voice mattered. As she sat in meetings with Carl, discussing the future of the company, Naomi felt a sense of pride she had never known before. She wasn't just there to serve. She was there to shape the future. And as she looked around at the powerful people who had once ignored her, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't invisible anymore. Naomi stood in front of her new office, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The sleek, modern design of the building reflected the new chapter in her life. It was no longer the bustling, impersonal restaurant she had once called home. Now, this was her domain. She had earned it. As she opened the door and walked into the room, the team she had assembled was already hard at work. There was a quiet hum of activity, people brainstorming and discussing ideas for the new initiative Carl had trusted her to lead. Naomi had already mapped out her vision. It wasn't just about diversity and inclusion. It was about real, lasting change. She had spent too many years working in the shadows, and now she was going to make sure the voices of people like her were heard. She was done with being underestimated. Naomi greeted her team, settling into the role of leader with a sense of calm authority that came naturally to her now. She could see the potential in each of them, and as she spoke to them, her words resonated with a confidence she had never known before. We're here to do more than just talk about change, she said, her voice steady but full of purpose. We're here to make it happen. We've all seen what happens when people are ignored, overlooked. But we're going to rewrite that narrative. We're going to show the world that change isn't just possible, it's inevitable. Her team responded with nods of agreement. Naomi knew that together, they could accomplish anything. This was her moment. As the days passed, Naomi threw herself into the work with relentless energy. She spent hours meeting with different departments, creating strategies, and breaking down barriers that had long existed in the company. Slowly but surely, she was starting to see the impact of her efforts. People were listening, and the changes she had fought for were starting to take shape. But as the initiative gained momentum, Naomi found herself facing unexpected challenges. Carl, while supportive of her efforts, had a way of keeping his distance. She often found herself second-guessing his motives, wondering if he truly believed in the work they were doing, or if he was just trying to appease her. She was no fool. She knew the corporate world well enough to understand the game people played. But this time, she was playing by her own rules. One afternoon, as Naomi sat in her office reviewing the latest progress reports, Carl walked in unannounced. He didn't knock, just entered with his usual air of authority. "Naomi," he said, his voice clipped, "I need to talk to you about the upcoming presentation. The board is questioning the direction we're taking." Naomi looked up from her papers, meeting his gaze. "The board? Or you?" she asked, her tone measured but firm. Carl seemed momentarily caught off guard by her directness, but he quickly recovered. "It's not about me. It's about the company's image. You know how this works. We can't afford to alienate our investors." Naomi sat back in her chair, her expression hardening. "I'm not trying to alienate anyone, but I'm not here to play the game by their rules either. If they don't understand the value of what we're doing, then maybe they're not the right partners for this company." Carl frowned, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're being idealistic, Naomi. You can't change the world overnight." Naomi stood up, walking over to the window. She stared out at the city below, her mind racing. She had worked too hard for this, sacrificed too much, to let anyone, or anything, hold her back now. "Maybe I can't change the world overnight," she said softly, "but I can change this company. And I will, whether you believe in it or not." Carl was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost reluctant. "I'm not trying to stop you, Naomi. I'm just saying you need to be careful. There's a fine line between pushing for change and pushing too hard." Naomi turned to face him, her eyes steely with determination. "I'm not pushing too hard, Carl. I'm just pushing. For once, it's time for someone to do the right thing, not the safe thing." Carl stared at her, a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps respect, perhaps something else, before he turned and left without another word. Naomi watched him go, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure if she had won him over or made him question everything. But she didn't care. She had her own path now, and she was ready to walk it, no matter the cost. As the weeks went by, Naomi's initiative began to take off. She had the backing of the team, and slowly, the board members started to see the value in what she was doing. Carl, though still distant, seemed to be stepping back and letting her take charge. Naomi was no longer just a waitress in a sea of people who didn't care. She was a leader, a force to be reckoned with. And she was just getting started. Naomi leaned back in her chair, looking out of the window at the busy city below. She had come a long way since that first night at the restaurant, when she had quietly served drinks and dealt with the subtle disdain of the guests. The work she was doing now, the changes she was driving in the company, felt monumental, but they were far from easy. The pressure was building, especially with Carl's increasing distance. He was still involved, but Naomi could feel the tension between them. It was as if he were testing her, holding back just enough to see if she would crack. But she was done cracking. She had faced too much in her life to let a challenge like this stop her. As the weeks went by, Naomi's work began to speak for itself. Her initiative was gaining recognition, not just within the company, but in the larger business world as well. She was invited to speak at conferences, interviewed by major media outlets, and even started to get calls from other companies looking for her expertise. It was more than she had ever imagined, and she was proud of what she had accomplished. But the truth was, Naomi wasn't in this for the fame or the accolades. She wasn't doing it for the recognition. She was doing it for the people who had been overlooked for far too long. The people like her, the ones who had been dismissed and ignored. She was doing it for the ones who didn't have a voice. Her thoughts were interrupted when her phone buzzed with a message from Carl's assistant. She had a meeting with Carl in 30 minutes. Naomi wasn't sure what to expect. Was this going to be another one of his half-hearted check-ins? Or was he finally going to give her the space to lead? When she entered his office, Carl was already seated at his desk, looking over some reports. His expression was neutral, but Naomi could sense the undercurrent of something more. He wasn't the same man she had first met. He seemed softer, more open, but still guarded. "Naomi," Carl greeted her, his voice calm, but there was a sharpness to it. "We need to talk." Naomi sat down across from him, her hands folded neatly on the desk. "About what?" she asked, keeping her tone steady. Carl leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the papers in front of him before meeting her gaze. "About how things are going with the initiative. You've been doing great work, but I think it's time we take things to the next level." Naomi raised an eyebrow. This was not what she had expected. "Next level? What do you mean?" Carl hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Look, I know I haven't been the easiest person to work with. but I need to know you're ready for what's next. The board is watching, and I need someone who can handle the pressure. We've already made some waves, but now it's time to move beyond ideas and start implementing real change. Naomi felt her heart rate pick up, but she didn't let it show. She had faced worse than this. She had spent her entire life working twice as hard for half as much. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm. You know I'm ready. But I need more than just a seat at the table. I need the resources to do the work. Carl stared at her for a long moment, and Naomi could see the wheels turning in his mind. For a brief moment, she thought he might push back, but then something shifted in his expression. I'll give you the resources, Carl said, his tone almost reluctant. But you need to understand the stakes. If this doesn't work, it's not just your job on the line. It's the future of the company. Naomi nodded. She had been expecting this. She wasn't naive enough to think everything would be handed to her. She had fought for every inch of ground she had gained, and she was willing to fight for more. I understand, she replied. Carl looked at her for a moment longer, as if assessing her resolve. Then he finally spoke, his voice softer. I know you do. And I believe in you, Naomi. Don't make me regret that. Naomi left his office with a mix of emotions swirling inside her. She had just been given the green light to take things to the next level, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. The weight of the responsibility felt heavier now, but it also felt right. This was her moment, and she wasn't about to let anyone, or anything, stand in her way. As she sat back at her desk, her mind raced with ideas and plans for the next phase of her initiative. There was so much to do, but for the first time, she felt like she had the power to make it happen. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't just a woman with a past to overcome. She was a leader, and she was going to change the game. Naomi stared at the papers in front of her, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her. She had been given the opportunity of a lifetime, and now it was up to her to make it work. Carl Montgomery had trusted her with the future of the company, but he had also warned her that the stakes were high. Failure wasn't an option. As she sat in her office, surrounded by the buzz of her team, working on new projects, she couldn't shake the pressure. She had been climbing for so long, fighting to be seen, to prove her worth. Now that she was at the top, the fear of losing it all felt suffocating. But Naomi wasn't a quitter. She had learned that lesson early in life. She had fought for everything she had, and she wasn't about to let it slip away now. She stood up from her desk, walking over to the large windows that overlooked the city. The view was breathtaking, the lights of the skyline sparkling in the distance. For a moment, Naomi allowed herself to take it all in. This was her moment, her success, her victory. She wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. But that night, as she prepared for an important presentation to the board, Naomi received an unexpected phone call. It was Carl. Naomi, he said, his voice tight. We need to talk. Her stomach dropped. She had a million things to do, and the last thing she wanted was a late-night meeting with Carl. What's going on? She asked, trying to keep her voice calm. I need you to meet me at the conference room in 20 minutes, Carl replied. There's been a complication with the initiative. Naomi's mind raced. What complication? Everything had been going smoothly, or so she thought. She grabbed her notes and quickly headed to the conference room, her heart pounding in her chest. When she arrived, Carl was already there, pacing back and forth. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced with a look of frustration. What happened? Naomi asked, her voice steady despite the nerves building inside her. Carl stopped pacing and turned to face her. It's the board, he said, his tone dark. They're not happy with the direction we're going. They think we're moving too fast, that the changes we're implementing are too radical. Naomi felt her chest tighten. She had known this might happen, but she had hoped it wouldn't. The board was filled with old-school executives who didn't understand the need for change. They were more concerned with maintaining the status quo than actually moving the company forward. So what now? Naomi asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Carl ran a hand through his hair. They want us to scale back, to tone down the diversity and inclusion initiatives. They don't think it's the right time for this kind of transformation. Naomi's blood ran cold. She had fought too hard for this. She wasn't about to back down now. Tell them no, she said, her voice firm. Carl looked at her, his eyes searching hers for a sign of doubt. Naomi, this isn't just about you and me, he said. This is about the future of the company. If we push too hard, we risk losing everything. Naomi stood tall, her resolve hardening. If we don't push, We'll lose everything anyway. The world is changing, Carl. We can't keep pretending like we're stuck in the past. If we want to be relevant, we have to lead that change. Carl stared at her for a long moment, and Naomi could see the wheels turning in his head. He was a man who had always controlled everything, but in that moment, she could see the hesitation in his eyes. Finally, he spoke. All right, he said, his voice low. We'll do it your way, but we'll need to be strategic. We can't afford to alienate too many people. Naomi nodded, feeling the weight of the decision settle in. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew it was the right choice. I'll make it work, she said, and I'll make them see that this is the future. Over the next few days, Naomi worked tirelessly to prepare for the presentation. She knew that this was her moment to prove that the company could embrace change and thrive in a new era. The night of the presentation, Naomi stood in front of the board, her team behind her, ready to fight for the future she believed in. Carl sat at the head of the table, his gaze steady as he watched Naomi take charge. She had come so far, and now it was time for her to take the next step. Ladies and gentlemen, Naomi began, her voice strong and clear. The world is changing, and we need to change with it. If we want to lead, we need to be bold. We need to be inclusive, and we need to make a difference. The room was silent as Naomi laid out her vision for the company's future, detailing the steps they would take to ensure diversity and inclusion were at the forefront of every decision. She spoke with conviction, her passion shining through as she made her case. By the end of the presentation, Naomi knew she had given everything she had. She had fought for what she believed in, and now it was up to the board to decide if they were willing to follow her lead. As the meeting came to a close, Carl stood up and addressed the room. Naomi has shown us a new path forward, he said, his voice resonating with authority. And I believe we should follow it. The board members exchanged looks, their expressions unreadable. But when they finally voted, the outcome was clear. Naomi had won. The future of the company had changed, and it was thanks to her vision, her courage, and her unwavering belief in what was possible. Naomi walked out of the conference room, feeling a sense of pride unlike anything she had ever experienced. She had done it. She had led the charge, and now the world was going to take notice. Naomi sat back in her chair, a deep sense of satisfaction flooding her as she stared out of the office window. The city below seemed so different now, vibrant, alive, and full of possibility. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged in this world. The board had approved her initiative, and now it was time to take everything she had worked for to the next level. But even with this success, Naomi knew that this was only the beginning. The path ahead was still uncertain, and there would be challenges she hadn't even anticipated. As she reviewed the strategic plans for the next quarter, a message from Carl popped up on her phone. It was a simple text, "We need to talk." Naomi had been expecting this. Carl had become a quiet supporter, but she had a feeling this conversation was going to be different. When she arrived at his office later that afternoon, the door was slightly ajar. Carl was sitting at his desk, flipping through some papers, but his usual calm demeanor was replaced with an air of tension. Naomi knocked lightly before stepping inside. "You wanted to talk?" she asked, her voice steady. Carl motioned for her to sit. "Yes, Naomi. First off, I want to say I'm proud of the work you've done. The initiative is already making waves, and you're moving us in the right direction. But there's something we need to address." Naomi's curiosity piqued. "What's going on?" Carl leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing slightly. "I've been getting some pushback. From investors, from board members. The changes you're advocating for, diversity, inclusion, the shift in our company culture, while they're necessary, they're also raising concerns about the bottom line." Naomi kept her composure, though inside, her heart was pounding. She had known this wouldn't be easy. "What kind of concerns?" she asked. Carl exhaled slowly. "The investors are worried about the market's reaction. They want to see more immediate returns, and they're skeptical of the long-term benefits of these changes. Some of them are even suggesting we scale back a bit, maybe push these initiatives to the back burner." Naomi's mind raced. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now it felt like everything was hanging in the balance. "I won't scale back," she said, her voice firm. "We've worked too hard to back down now. These changes aren't just about profits. They're about creating a company that matters, a company that stands for something." Carl looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "I understand. But the reality is, Naomi, we have to balance values with results. I've always believed in you, but I need to know you're ready to navigate this carefully. Naomi's heart beat faster. She wasn't afraid of a challenge. She had fought for every step she had taken to get here, and she wasn't about to stop now. I'm ready, she said. I won't compromise our values, but I will find a way to prove that these changes are not only right, they're profitable. We can do both. Carl leaned forward, his gaze intense. Good. I like that. But be prepared. The pressure is going to increase. Naomi nodded. I know, but I've already decided, this is my fight. And I'm not backing down. As Naomi left Carl's office, she couldn't help but feel a mix of determination and uncertainty. She had the support of Carl, but now she had to prove herself to everyone else. She knew the road ahead was going to be tough, but she was prepared to take it head on. Over the next few weeks, Naomi immersed herself even deeper into her work. She spent long nights developing new strategies, meeting with investors, and fine-tuning the details of her plan. She knew she had to convince them that change was not only necessary, but that it would drive the company's success. She wasn't just asking for their support. She was showing them that embracing diversity, inclusion, and social responsibility would be the key to long-term growth. It wasn't easy. There were moments when Naomi felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. Some investors were resistant, stuck in their old ways, unwilling to see the bigger picture. But Naomi didn't waver. She kept pushing forward, using every ounce of her energy and determination to make them see the truth. Finally, the day came when Naomi had the chance to present her revised plan to the board. She had taken all of their concerns into account and had developed a strategy that not only upheld her values, but also ensured the company's success. As she stood in front of the room, with Carl by her side, Naomi felt a surge of confidence. She had come so far, and now, this was her chance to prove everything. Ladies and gentlemen, Naomi began, her voice strong and clear. What we're talking about today is not just change. It's transformation. A transformation that will lead us to a future where our company is not only successful but respected. A future where we create value, not just for our shareholders, but for the communities we serve. Naomi outlined her plan with clarity, presenting facts, figures, and projections that showed the undeniable link between social responsibility and profitability. The room was silent as she spoke, the board members hanging on every word. By the time Naomi finished, she could feel the energy in the room shift. The resistance had melted away, and in its place was a sense of understanding. The board had seen the potential, and they were ready to follow her lead. When the final vote was cast, Naomi's heart raced as the results were read. It was unanimous. The company was on board. Naomi had done it. She had not only convinced the board, she had convinced herself. She was no longer just a waitress, no longer someone who had to fight for a seat at the table. She was a leader, and this was only the beginning. Naomi walked into the bustling office the next morning, her heart still racing from the success of the board meeting the day before. The weight of the decision was settling in, and as she passed the now familiar faces of her team, she couldn't help but smile. This was it. The moment she had worked for, the moment she had dreamed of. Everything had changed. Her phone buzzed as she approached her desk, and when she checked the message, she saw Carl's name. Great job yesterday, the message read, followed by, You've proven them wrong, Naomi. I've got your back. Let's keep pushing. Naomi felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. It had been a long road, and Carl's support, while sometimes reserved, had been invaluable. He had given her the space to prove herself, and now, together, they were ready to transform the company. As she sat down, Naomi took a moment to gather her thoughts. There was still so much to do. The initiative was just beginning, and she had to ensure that the momentum didn't die. She had laid the foundation for change, but now it was time to build something lasting. The office was quieter than usual this morning. People were still recovering from the previous day's big decisions. Naomi felt a sense of calm settle over her as she opened her laptop. This was her chance to reshape not just the company's future, but her own. No longer was she the invisible waitress, the woman who only served drinks and followed orders. She was a leader, a trailblazer, and she had earned this. Naomi's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching her desk. It was her assistant, Rachel, who had been with her from the start. Hey, Naomi, Rachel said, her voice full of excitement. I just heard the news. The press is already catching wind of what's happening here. People are starting to talk. They're calling this a revolutionary moment for the company. Naomi's smile widened. That's exactly what we want. Let them talk. Let them see what we're capable of. Rachel's eyes sparkled with admiration. You've really changed everything. This place is buzzing with energy. People are finally feeling like they're part of something bigger. Naomi felt a surge of pride. She had worked so hard to bring this sense of purpose to the company, and now it was starting to resonate with everyone. She stood up, looking around the office. We're just getting started, she said with quiet determination. Now is when the real work begins. We need to keep pushing, keep proving that this isn't just a trend. It's a new way of doing business. As the day unfolded, Naomi found herself in back-to-back meetings, strategizing with her team on how to implement the changes they had discussed. There was no turning back now. The company was on track to becoming the model for diversity and inclusion in the industry, and Naomi was determined to make sure it stayed that way. Later that afternoon, as she sat in her office reviewing some of the progress reports, Naomi received another message from Carl. We need to talk. Let's have lunch tomorrow. Naomi's brow furrowed. Carl had been supportive, but this message felt different. What could he want to discuss now? Was this about the company's future, or something more personal? Naomi quickly typed a response. Sure, I'll be there. The next day, Naomi arrived at the restaurant, where she had agreed to meet Carl. As she walked in, she saw him already seated at a corner booth. He looked up as she approached, his expression thoughtful. Naomi, he said, standing to greet her. Please sit. She took a seat across from him, her mind racing with possibilities. What's on your mind? She asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Carl took a deep breath, his fingers tapping gently on the table. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened recently. You've done an incredible job, Naomi, and I mean that. But there's something I need to say. Naomi waited, her eyes focused on him, her curiosity piqued. Carl leaned forward slightly. I've been doing some reflection on my own. Watching you fight for these changes, fight for what's right. And it's made me realize something about myself, about how I've been. I've always focused on the bottom line, the profits, the success. But I never took a step back to think about the people, about what really matters. Naomi listened carefully, sensing that something significant was coming. Carl continued. You've shown me that it's not just about numbers. It's about purpose, about creating something meaningful. And I want to be part of that, Naomi. I want to make sure I'm supporting you fully, not just from the sidelines. I want to help lead this change alongside you. Naomi's heart swelled with emotion. Carl's words were unexpected, but they meant more than she could say. She had always respected him for his business acumen. But this was something deeper. Thank you, Carl, she said, her voice steady but filled with gratitude. That means more than you know. As they continued talking over lunch, Naomi felt a sense of calm wash over her. Carl's admission wasn't just about his support. It was about a shared vision, one that transcended profits and personal gain. They were in this together, and together, they were going to change the world of business. Naomi left the restaurant that day with a renewed sense of purpose. She had fought hard to get to where she was, but now, with Carl's commitment, she knew they were unstoppable. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Naomi was ready for whatever came next. She had proven that she was more than just a waitress. She was a leader, and now, she was going to lead the charge for a better future. In this powerful journey, Naomi, a young black waitress, rises above the challenges of her past to lead a corporate transformation that embodies the essence of black stories. Starting as an invisible worker in a high-end restaurant, Naomi's story unfolds into one of empowerment, determination, and groundbreaking change. Through her journey, Naomi challenges the status quo and proves that even in spaces where she was once overlooked, her voice matters. As she ascends in the corporate world, she faces resistance but continues to fight for inclusivity and social justice, showing that black stories are not just tales of survival, but of thriving against the odds. As Naomi leads a major diversity initiative, her story becomes a beacon of inspiration, demonstrating how black stories in the workplace can redefine leadership and success. From boardroom battles to personal revelations, Naomi's journey highlights the importance of black voices in positions of power and leadership, leaving a lasting impact on the company and beyond. These are the Black stories that inspire, showing how far determination and belief in oneself can take you.